Ag Life, presented by ADM Lloydminster.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome to Ag Life. I'm Gerard Lampow. On the menu, the battle for the mind as we deal with consumer perceptions. We have a chat about the legal options of passing on that family farm legacy. And it's time for a treat, a triticale treat. But first, keeping grain bags out of landfills is just one aspect of this next story. I find out there's now a way to keep the value added of reusable garbage in Saskatchewan. These 4 old hog barns were built on 56 acres of land in 2000 and were abandoned in 2007. They sat empty until 2014. Since then, it's been repurposed to collect waste from 5 Saskatchewan municipalities.
The original idea was that all these barns would be a great place for economic development for the area and developing any sort of business related to waste management and to sustainability.
John Kindrachuk is a farmer who is on the cusp of turning garbage into reusable materials. This is the goal of this operation, named after the intersecting highways 16 of 43.
Each barn is 20,000 square feet with an office building, and there's a 3-cell lagoon system that we're using, one for burying waste, one for collecting leachate, and one for whatever next for expansion.
Of concern to agriculture is diverting grain bags from landfills or being burned on the farm. Clean Farms Canada is the program manager for recycling grain bags. In 2018, more than 1,000 metric tons of grain bags has been recycled.
We're assuming this is approximately 50% of the material that's out there. And our goal is definitely to try and get to that 75% recycling rate in Saskatchewan for grain bags.
Clean Farms is also interested in addressing the needs of municipalities collecting grain bags so they can get closer to recycling targets.
So that producers can bring this material in, the sites can ship the material, and the recyclers can recycle the material. So it's really an integrated partnership to make sure the material is as clean and as less contaminated as possible so that we can keep the cycle going.
Moving garbage also needs a reliable collection service. Recycling of single-use items like grain bags and plastics means it can be used again.
The cleaning of it, the processing of it, and as John was saying before, the pelletizing of it, and it's just plastic again, and it can be reused rather than being landfilled.
So there you have it. Still to come on our show, facing up to consumer perceptions. Do stay with us.
This segment of Ag Life is brought to you by Webb's Machinery. Webb's Machinery, your New Holland dealer in Vermilion, Vegreville, and Lamont.
Welcome back. Winning the battle for the mind is key as ag producers seek to address consumer perceptions. Let's check out farm and food care.
Once we hit 2016, there was a decline in the overall positive impressions.
So Farm and Food Care, there's 3 different provincial bodies, one in Ontario, one in Prince Edward Island, and here in Saskatchewan.
Clint Munchuk has a grain farm and a table egg business in Lanigan, Saskatchewan. He says consumers care about where their food comes from.
As we see more technology around social media, I think people are seeing more and more things about food, and people are genuinely interested to knowing how their food is actually being produced.
Munchuk shares with people who ask about his chicken operation and animal welfare.
I walked her through exactly how we raise our hens and showed her actually a video that I've posted on my YouTube channel that shows how the hens are treated. And at the end, she went, "It's so great to actually see this is how you care about your birds."
Munchuk says producers need to tell their stories in the face of misinformation. One such issue is the neonics honeybee population debate.
Based on an event that happened back in 2006 to 2008, where there was a collapse of colonies in North America. A lot of people pegged this on a product called neonics, and what researchers found afterwards, there were multiple different issues around that time, including winter kill with the bee colonies. And what we see right now is there's actually increasing honeybee populations here in Canada and the United States, and we continue to use the product like neonics.
Honeybee colonies are up nearly 38% in the last 5 years. Munchak encourages producers to reach out to consumers.
We need to talk to people with their heart. You know, you start with your heart and you can get into the science and the facts later, but you need to lead with your heart.
We have birds.
Passing on the family farm is an important aspect of preserving legacy. I meet a lawyer who is encouraging producers to make the time for this conversation.
Is that a gift now? Is it intended to be a gift later?
Women have always been a big part of farm operations and are continuing to grow their presence on farms. And so it was really fun to get together with a group of women and talk about all things related to agriculture.
Kaylee Shire grew up on a grain farm near Mervyn, Saskatchewan. She studied commerce and law at the U of A and has worked in Edmonton. She's back in Lloydminster to be closer to family. She was speaking to rural women on estate planning and farm transition.
Everybody should have a valid will and a power of attorney and a healthcare directive or personal directive, and they need to have a farm transition plan that is in writing. So to sit down with your family and make sure that everybody understands and you've got good tax advice and legal advice on that, and everybody's got it nailed down in writing and understanding what the plan is.
Shire admits everyone's plan is different. It's also hard to agree, and with emotions involved, there are things that still need to be said in a rational manner.
I think one of the biggest problems that I see that makes farm transition planning a difficult process is that people have put it off for a long time, and different members of the farm family have come to arrive at different expectations about what's going to happen. The longer you let that go on, the harder it is to come up with a plan that everybody can agree with. So sometimes farm families come in and they're all in agreement and they have really good communication and they know exactly what they want to do. Other farm families come in and they can't even sit at the table together, and there's a lot of work that has to go into bringing everybody together before we can get a good plan in place.
Finding common ground is also complicated if it happens to be during a family crisis.
The more you can plan ahead, the better, and you don't want to have to be dealing with lawyers and accountants in the middle of a stressful situation when somebody's gotten hurt or somebody's passed away unexpectedly. So if you can do this while you're in good health and you're in a good place, then that makes the process a whole lot easier.
Shire has this advice even if you don't know where to start.
Pick somebody who is an advisor that you trust and you know well, and reach out to them and let them know that you want to start to do some planning, whether it's your lawyer or your accountant or your banker or even an insurance agent sometimes. And that person will probably know where to start and at least be able to connect you with somebody that can help you get your farm transition planning going smoothly.
And one of the topics we'll add to that conversation is the taxes involved in transition, and hence again the importance to have those conversations soon. When we come back, we'll return to License to Farm for the extended interviews, looking again at consumer challenges. Welcome back. If you thought you've missed our community events, it's still to come. It's coming up at the end of the show, so stick around for that. Now, this next segment comes to us from Saskanola. License to Farm tackled the hot-button topics facing agriculture. We also want to share the interview segments, so here's the one dealing with consumer challenges.
The family farm, a tradition in Canada going back 200 years.
What we put in our bodies, what we choose to buy in the store, it's wrapped into our identity now. We're starting to see the pressure that this increasingly, urban consumer can really exert on our producers.
Especially these days when there's so much controversy about many nutritional issues and many farming issues. People are confused, they're bewildered, they don't know who to listen to, who is correct. Relatively, until recent times, until 70, 80 years ago, 70% of the population was somehow involved in farming. Today, it's less than 2%. 2% of the population is providing the fantastic amount of food that we enjoy. Well, that obviously had to come about with some innovations in technology.
There's concern about GMOs, about genetically modified organisms, mostly because people don't really understand what they are. And certainly there is concern in regards to the use of pesticides, whether they be insecticides or herbicides or fungicides, in that I think consumers in a lot of ways sort of don't understand why they're necessary. There are very few emotions that that humans have that really make us want to act, and fear, that's one of them. If we're reading things, and especially as a mom, or if you're making decisions for your family, and you see something that's alarming, it's natural, I think, to want to err on the side of caution.
A lot of the activists, who promote what I consider are illegitimate fears about our food, do it very well. You have to give them begrudging respect for their activism. They come out with very romanticized arguments, not scientifically based, but very, very compelling.
Things like the anti-GMO movement, or the move to regulating pesticides. It is an incredibly large and powerful group. With every sort of added regulation or policy that gets put into place based on consumer concerns as opposed to scientific concerns, we run the risk of moving towards the point where the practicality component gets taken out entirely. What we have is good. We're doing good things. What is really important to me is where this technology is going to take us. Things like using less water to produce the same yield, using less nitrogen to produce the same yield. These are the sort of traits that I think resonate with consumers.
So I think it's very important to point out to people the difference between scientific knowledge and hearsay and emotion and the all-knowing they say. Well, who is the they? It is not the people who are doing the legitimate research in that area.
We live in a world of very quick snippets of Facebook posts and Twitter handles and 140 characters and tight headlines, and we skim. We don't really read. We don't necessarily think super critically or question where the information's coming from all the time. There are things that pop up on my feed that I really want to say, did you even look where this came from before you hit share?
And I think it's our job in the scientific community to try to counter that, to instruct people on how we in the scientific realm really know what we know. Why should we be believed when we say that concerns about genetic modification, concerns about pesticide residues are overblown, whereas many of the activists maintain that we're inundated with disease and that we are confronting a cancer epidemic, etc. Why is it that isn't really correct, and why should they believe what we say? And I think the basic answer to that is how we know what we know. And what we know really relies on the scientific literature. It relies on what we refer to as the peer-reviewed scientific literature, whereby a scientist will do some kind of study, submit it to a journal. The journal will send it out to experts in the field who then evaluate it and determine whether or not it deems to be published. That's quite different from looking at the Huffington Post or looking at the National Enquirer, or in fact looking at any newspaper, where they are not as meticulous about looking at where the information comes from.
I grew up on a farm. It was all I ever wanted to do. I love animals. I love plants. I'm fascinated by how they all work together and how there's nothing simple about any of it. I didn't know exactly what I wanted to do, but I wanted to work with farmers. So ag journalism has become sort of farming by proxy. I get to chase down anything I find interesting. The farmers I know that I get to work with, that I have the pleasure of working with, are incredibly passionate. These are people that are just so down to earth and so connected with what they do. Just because someone is a conventional farmer doesn't mean they're not also an environmentalist. It doesn't mean that a farmer doesn't also worry about the safety of the food that they feed their family. Farmers are also consumers. They make choices in the grocery store just like we do, just like their customers do.
So whenever we look at concerns that people have about modern farming, you have to look at the other side, about what it has allowed us to have. Is this vast food supply.
We don't necessarily get that reality check of what it really takes to have avocados in the grocery store 12 months out of the year. The average consumer wants to buy fresh vegetables and lovely produce and the meat that they choose and all these sorts of wonderful things. They want them to be available, but they don't always think about what it took to get them there.
My feeling always has been that high school students should be made to spend 2 weeks on a farm. And then they would realize, how difficult it is to grow food, and how you have to worry about weather conditions, and a 30-second hailstorm can destroy your crop for the year, and what difficulties farmers face.
If you walk into a grocery store, you can see the very real impact of what a consumer demand can do. And you walk in now and they've gone to sort of a farmer kind of farmer's market food stand sort of look. There's large splashy, be well and make great choices and eat healthy and eat organic. It's everywhere. Now, organic actually has a whole certification system behind it, but we've got all sorts of labels that don't, and they're just marketing.
Of course, there is the romanticized idea that a small farm somehow produces better quality food than what is possible to do on quote, industrial farms today. Well, how do you evaluate that? The only way to evaluate it is based upon the chemistry of the food. You take a look at that pea or that apple that is grown on the small farm. You take a look at the other and see, is there any chemical difference? Fact is that there isn't, because what you're looking at are different production methods, but that doesn't result in a different final product. This is not to decry the fact that organic agriculture can't work. It can on a limited basis, but it's not going to feed 10 billion people who will be coming to dinner by 2050. We have the luxury of worrying about trivia here, certainly in North America, because we don't have to worry where our food supply comes from. So we worry instead about traces of pesticide residues in that food supply. So we need to have, the proper perspective.
We, as a North American or European very wealthy society, are sort of saying, we want this purist ideal, and we really could stop this technology from helping the very people that it really needs to help, those that live in countries that are not self-sufficient, that they don't have food security. And so it's a very, I think it's coming from a place of incredible wealth and privilege to blindly sort of be putting this pressure and digging our heels in on some of this technology that really has phenomenal potential to do so many wonderful things.
Today, thanks to farmers, it is possible to eat better than anyone has ever eaten in history.
There you have it, Joe Schwartz, a chemist who spent his life sharing and breaking down chemistry so that we could all understand it. Lindsay Smith, someone I can take a page out to, an editor who gets to meet and hang out with lots of great ag producers there and sharing their stories. Well, when we come back, we look at the feeding options that cattle go through to, get through those colder months. Do stay with us.
Ag Life, presented by ADM Lloydminster.
Well, triticale, the name alone sounds like a treat for cattle to eat. Some more now on the feed options that get producers and cattle through those cold winter months.
Because triticale tends to be maybe some issues in palatability or dry matter intake, and so we looked at it maybe as another alternative to oat or barley.
Triticale is a cross between wheat and rye that producers are using in their winter rotations. Bart Lardner at the U of S has studied it for biomatter and backgrounding. Another winter option is a so-called super oat.
The new variety of oats that came out of the Crop Development Center breeding program at the University of Saskatchewan was CDC SO1, or super oat we call it. In fact, it's got elevated levels of fat and low lignin, so low fiber.
The U of S team is pretty stoked about their research, especially on a backgrounding diet.
You don't have to process the grain. In fact, the cows will gain similar with unprocessed oat in the diet compared to barley that was processed.
Lardner says that that's about a $10 to $30 per ton saving for producers as they don't have to process the grain. Another test was on a SWAT grazing program.
In fact, the cows did quite well, especially at that hard dough stage. And so it's an interesting variety. Certainly, in my mind, it's a variety that might have a little more energy for the animal out there in an extensive grazing system, especially on winter days where we see a wind chill factor.
High energy levels for cows getting ready to calve is certainly a bonus in frigid weather, especially where maintaining body condition is critical.
We want to maintain that condition with those cows coming out in April, just coming into calving.
And it's time now to roll our community events. That's a wrap on this edition of Ag Life. Yours in Ag. Take care.